Jon Snow's story in the most recent books of the A Song of Ice and Fire series begins with a scene so important that we see it twice. Once in Samwell 1, A Feast for Crows, and once in Jon 2, A Dance with Dragons. This scene sees Jon sending his longtime friend, along with Gilly and her son, to Old Town to train as the next maester for the Night's Watch. However, the twist to this scene is revealed in its second iteration. In Jon 2, A Dance with Dragons, we learn that Jon forces Gilly to swap her baby with that of Mance Rayder. He's worried that Melisandre, who just arrived at the Wall, is going to burn Mance Rayder's son in a king's blood sacrifice to try to increase Stannis' strength or otherwise prevent the Long Night or reawaken Azor Ahai. This baby swap serves as a central moral test for Jon and kicks off his struggle throughout this book with deciding between what is right and what must happen, what must be done to prevent the war with the others. This baby swap is incredibly indicative to a theme of Jon's story in Dance. We note that things in the North and things at the Wall might not be as they seem. Later on, about halfway through this book, we get a chapter from Melisandre's perspective for the first time. In this passage, we learn of Mance Rayder's survival. He was assumedly burned at the stake in an earlier Jon chapter, but thanks to Melisandre's magic, he has survived. Thanks to this ruby-inlaid necklace, we know that he is able to glamour himself with Melisandre's magic to make him look like the Lord of Bones rather than his regular Mance Rayder self. We see Jon learn this, and later Mance is sent off to Winterfell to try to free Theon and fake Arya from their plight, but this key plot point of things not being as they seem, or swapped identities, could play a role in Jon's eventual death at the end of A Dance with Dragons. For you see, there are indications in the text that make it all but confirmed that Jon Snow does not truly die at the end of A Dance with Dragons. He doesn't die and is going to be resurrected like happens in that stupid HBO show, or like some people think he will with Ghost. No, Jon Snow did not die at all. Jon Snow is not present in this chapter, in the chapter where he's supposedly stabbed. Someone else is stabbed. Martin introduces a Chekhov's gun of a viewpoint character in A Dance with Dragons, and it is that viewpoint character who ends up sacrificing himself to advance a worthy cause. The person killed in the fourth to last chapter of A Dance with Dragons is not Jon Snow, it's Jon Connington. In A Feast for Crows, George R.R. Martin began a pretty peculiar practice. Rather than naming chapters after the characters' actual names, which is what he'd done for the three previous books, he began naming chapters after titles associated with certain characters, particularly when these characters don't have their true identities, or are somehow just obscuring or not being their truest selves. When Jon Connington is introduced in A Dance with Dragons as a viewpoint, we see two chapters from his perspective, neither of which are named Jon. Because, yeah, it'd be confusing to have two viewpoint characters named Jon. Or would it? Did Martin introduce another viewpoint character named Jon with direct connections to Jon Snow's true father, Rhaegar, if there was really no reason for that? Or did he have something planned? The mainstream media will tell you that Jon Connington has only had two chapters so far in A Song of Ice and Fire, those being The Lost Lord and The Griffin Reborn, both of which center around his struggle to place Jon Snow's supposed brother, Aegon VI Targaryen, on the Iron Throne. However, we know as fans that Aegon Targaryen might not be as he seems. People think he's a Blackfire, people think he's a Bright Flame. It doesn't matter. He's not Rhaegar's son. We know this for a fact. We know everything for a fact. So it stands to reason that if young Griff is not who he seems, old Griff might have found this out, and in doing so, he might seek out the true son of Rhaegar to try to help him instead of this false dragon, as Dany sees it. The Lost Lord takes place near Volantis in Essos. The Griffin Reborn takes place at Griffin's Roost, Jon Connington's old seat. These chapters have a massive amount of time and distance between them, and I think that Martin is signaling here that people can teleport, first off, we know that from the TV series, and he's showing that Jon Connington possesses this ability, and that it should be expected between Connington's chapters. This massive distance between Volantis and Griffin's Roost could be similar to the distance between, say, Griffin's Roost and a location in the far north, where Connington might travel to save Rhaegar's true son. We know from Jon Connington's chapters that he's dying of grayscale, and if he is already doomed to death, what better way to use his life than to preserve Rhaegar's son's life? We also know that Melisandre is somebody who's been trying to protect Jon for this entire book, warning him against daggers in the dark, which only she sees and he begins to ignore after some of her predictions aren't quite right. What if this magical sorceress is able to reach out to Jon Connington and summon him to her, telling him through the flames somehow that, oh, you should come north to Castle Black and take the place of this Lord Commander to die in his stead because he is the true Azor Ahai. It's also worth noting that Melisandre's glamours seem to be tied to one specific type of gemstone, that being a ruby. Not only does that match the colors of Jon Connington's house, which I assume is very important because aesthetics are everything in this series, ask the Raven feather cloak of House Blackwood, but also rubies are associated with Rhaegar Targaryen, who is Jon Connington's one true love and the reason for most of his actions, including, assumedly, saving Jon's life. There are also hints in the text that could inform us as to Jon's true nature in his final supposed chapter. In this passage, we see Jon asking for these massive amounts of mulled wine, which is pretty out of character for him. He doesn't drink much, but we do know that Jon Connington requested that kind of wine to cure his grayscale. We also hear that Ghost is acting strangely in this chapter. Ghost has been near Jon for pretty much the entirety of this book, but he's pretty absent in this chapter, which is convenient for the mutineers. And I don't know, if Jon is not truly himself, I think the only being that might be able to see through that glamour is this direwolf that is bonded to him. And that might be able to kind of tip the others off. Oh, if Ghost isn't with him, maybe that's not truly Jon. Jon Connington acting as Jon Snow would not have that same bond with the direwolf and could be a bit of a red flag to Bowen Marsh and the others. We also have the main action of this chapter other than the mutiny itself, that being the reception of the pink letter from Ramsay Bolton. Jon Snow would never break an oath or be conflicted about anything if the show's to be believed, and I do believe the show, so it does make sense that Jon Connington, instead of acting as though Jon would in this circumstance, decides to take the bait, to try to meet Ramsay in the field and seek justice to save his family or whatever. It's essentially Jon Connington really doing a really smart move to try to provoke these brothers into a mutiny to get this over with so then Jon Snow can come back in and execute all of those who would have mutinied against him. It's 4D chess, and I think it's genius, and it's excellent writing by George Martin. I think that Jon Connington is a great narrative sleight of hand by George R.R. Martin. By introducing this other viewpoint named Jon, he has allowed himself to effectively execute his main character and have the world's greatest fake-out death. Everybody loves a fake-out death, and I think that the Song of Ice and Fire community is going to be thrilled when they realize, no, this wasn't Jon Snow who died in the snow here. It was Jon Connington, dying for the son of his beloved Rhaegar. This theory can be taken even further. I think Jon Snow and Jon Connington were swapped for the entirety of Dance. It makes sense. Think about it. So when Griff meets Tyrion, he's very suspicious of the Lannister. This isn't because he doesn't know Tyrion. It's because he does know Tyrion. Jon remembers him from the first book and does not trust him given all that he's gone through. And you can see that Tyrion has clearly slipped. He's a lot more evil now. And it makes sense to just very much want to steer away from whatever Tyrion is saying. I think it all makes sense. Maybe they're the same character. What if every Jon is the same Jon? I think that tracks. Jon Arryn isn't dead. I know you'll need a minute to just comprehend the genius of this theory, but while you're doing that, be sure to leave a like and subscribe. I really appreciate it. I've had this theory in mind for quite a while, and I don't know, for some reason just felt like posting it today, You know how it is. I will be back with more A Song of Ice and Fire theories in the near future and more House of the Dragon coverage when more stuff comes out for that. So if you enjoyed, be sure to leave a like and subscribe, all that typical YouTube stuff. I really appreciate all that, and yeah, I will see you all in the very near future. Goodbye!